The sun rose over Washington, D.C., painting the white buildings with a golden glow. Karoline Leavitt woke up at 5:30 a.m., just like she did every morning since becoming press secretary. Her small apartment wasn't far from the White House, a place she still couldn't believe she worked at sometimes. Just 6 years ago, she was reporting local news in a small New Hampshire town. Now at 27, she was the voice of the administration. She followed her morning routine: shower, coffee, review of overnight news alerts, and preparation of talking points for the day's briefing. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters, staff members, and occasionally her mom, who still couldn't get used to seeing her daughter on national television. Another day, another battle, she muttered to herself, taking a final sip of coffee before slipping on her navy blue blazer, the one her dad had given her when she first moved to D.C. "For when you need to look the part," he'd said with a wink. The walk to work was Karoline's thinking time. Today she was mentally preparing for questions about yesterday's press conference. She had strongly criticized a recent Supreme Court decision that blocked a major infrastructure project the administration had championed. "The court seems more interested in political games than economic progress," she had said, a line that made headlines across the country. She didn't regret saying it. The project would have created thousands of jobs in areas that desperately needed them. People were counting on those opportunities. The court's decision felt wrong, and she believed the American people deserved honesty. As she walked through security, Charlie, the guard who'd been there for 30 years, greeted her with his usual smile. "Morning, Leavitt. Ready for another round with the Wolves?" he joked, referring to the press corps. "Always ready, Charlie. Someone's got to keep them honest," she replied with a grin. She had just settled at her desk when her assistant, Tom, knocked on her door. His face looked unusually serious. "There's a courier here. Special delivery from the Supreme Court. They're asking for your signature only." Karoline felt a flutter of unease. The Supreme Court didn't send couriers to press secretaries. That wasn't normal. She nodded, and Tom showed in a formal-looking man in a dark suit who handed her a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the official seal of the Supreme Court. "Ms. Leavitt, delivery confirmed at 8:17 a.m., he said stiffly, holding out a digital pad for her signature. After he left, Karoline stared at the envelope for a long moment. The heavy paper felt ominous in her hands. Finally, she took a deep breath and broke the seal. As she unfolded the document inside, her eyes widened. The official letterhead of the Supreme Court topped the page, but it was the words that followed that made her heart pound. "Notice of contempt and fine, $50,000. "This can't be real," she whispered, but continued reading. The document stated that Chief Justice John Roberts had personally issued a fine against her for contemptuous statements undermining the judiciary and its independence during yesterday's press conference. The fine cited her specific words, questioning the court's motivations, and claimed she had crossed constitutional boundaries between executive and judicial branches. Karoline's hands began to shake slightly. $50,000. That was more than she had in savings. It was almost a year's worth of rent payments. But beyond the money, the implications were staggering. A Supreme Court justice was directly punishing a press secretary for criticizing a court decision. She read the document again, trying to process what was happening. The fine was due within 30 days, and failure to pay could result in additional sanctions. There was a reference to a rarely used judicial power that allowed the court to protect itself from attacks that undermine its constitutional function. The document ended with Robert's signature, bold and confident. Karoline sank into her chair, her mind racing. She'd studied political science and constitutional law in college. She knew the separation of powers doctrine. She understood the importance of an independent judiciary, but she also believed in free speech and the right to criticize government institutions. This felt wrong on a fundamental level. Her phone rang, startling her. It was Lisa, her childhood friend who now worked as an attorney at the Justice Department. "Have you seen the news?" Lisa asked urgently. "What news?" Karoline replied, still staring at the document. "It's all over the legal blogs. Roberts issued a contempt fine against you. No one's ever seen anything like it. So it was real, not a mistake or a prank. I just got the document, Karoline said, her voice steadier than she felt. Lisa, can he actually do this? There was a pause on the other end. Honestly, it's unprecedented. The court has contempt powers, but they're almost always limited to conduct in the courtroom or direct interference with court proceedings. This is different. Karoline thought about her parents back home. Her dad worked as a high school history teacher and her mom ran a small bookstore. They had remortgaged their house to help pay for her college education. They were so proud when she landed this job. What would they think now? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Maria, the chief of staff. The president wants to see you. Now, as Karoline walked the long hallway to the Oval Office, still clutching the document, she felt dozens of eyes following her. News traveled fast in this building. People were whispering, some looking sympathetic, others curious. A few even seemed pleased by her predicament. Standing outside the Oval Office, Karoline took a deep breath. This could go one of two ways. The administration might distance themselves from her comments to appease the court, or they might stand behind her. Either way, her career and reputation hung in the balance. And somehow, in this moment, something even bigger seemed at stake. A question about what people in government could and couldn't say about other branches of that same government. She straightened her blazer, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and knocked on the door of the most powerful office in the world, uncertain what awaited her on the other side. Karoline stepped into the Oval Office, her heart pounding. The president sat behind his desk, flanked by the White House counsel and chief of staff. Their faces gave nothing away. "Sit down, Karoline," the president said, gesturing to a chair. She handed him the document. As he read it, his expression darkened. "Has this ever happened before?" he asked the White House counsel. "Never, sir," the lawyer replied. "It's constitutionally questionable at best." The president leaned back in his chair, studying Karoline. "What do you think we should do?" She hadn't expected that question. She thought they would tell her what to do, maybe ask for her resignation to smooth things over with the court. "Sir, with respect, I think we should fight this," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "If a Supreme Court justice can fine a government spokesperson for criticizing a decision, where does it end? Today it's me, tomorrow it could be a senator, or even you." A hint of a smile crossed the president's face. "That's exactly what I was thinking." The meeting lasted another hour, with legal options discussed and political considerations weighed. By the end, they had the beginnings of a plan. Karoline would not pay the fine, nor would she apologize. The administration would support her, framing this as a free speech issue, not a partisan one. "This isn't going to be easy," the chief of staff warned as the meeting ended. "Roberts has friends in both parties. The media will be split." "I understand," Karoline said, "but some things are worth fighting for." Back at her office, Karoline found her team waiting anxiously. Among them was Ben, her deputy, whose worried expression softened slightly when he saw she wasn't cleaning out her desk. "So?" he asked. "We fight," she said simply. "I need everyone in the conference room in 15 minutes. While her team gathered, Karoline called her parents. Her dad answered on the second ring. "Sweetie, we've been watching the news. Are you okay?" Karoline felt a lump in her throat. "I'm okay, Dad. It's complicated, but I'm going to stand my ground." "That's my girl," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Remember what I always told you about the First Amendment? It's first for a reason," she quoted, smiling despite everything. In the conference room, Karoline faced her team of 8 communications staff. Some looked worried, others determined. All waited for her lead. "I'm sure you've all heard by now," she began. "Chief Justice Roberts has personally fined me $50,000 for criticizing the court's decision yesterday." She held up the document. "This piece of paper isn't really about me, or about one press conference. It's about whether government officials can speak freely about other branches of government." Ben raised his hand. "What's the strategy?" The usual playbook would be to apologize and move on. Karoline shook her head. Not this time. This isn't just another news cycle to manage. This is a constitutional question. For the next 3 hours, they worked on their approach. Karoline insisted this couldn't be about parties or politics, it had to be about principles. By early evening, they had mapped out a communications strategy unlike any they'd done before. I want to do a major interview, Karoline told them. But not with the usual friendly outlets. That's risky, warned Anna, her media relations director. Friendly outlets would let you control the narrative. Exactly why we shouldn't use them, Karoline replied. This can't look like partisan theater. We need someone with credibility across the political spectrum. They settled on Chen, a veteran journalist known for tough but fair interviews. His show Straight Talk was watched by millions from both parties. Getting on would be tough. The show was booked months in advance, but within an hour of reaching out, Chen's producer called back. They wanted Karoline on tomorrow night. They bumped the Treasury Secretary for you, Anna said, hanging up the phone. This is big. That night, Karoline barely slept. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary, felt like a war room. Legal experts texted their thoughts. Former press secretaries from both parties called with advice. Her college constitutional law professor sent a 3-page analysis of why the fine was legally dubious. At midnight, her phone rang again. It was Lisa from Justice. I shouldn't be telling you this, Lisa said in a low voice. But there's division in the court. 2 justices have privately expressed concerns about Roberts' action. They think he overstepped. That could be helpful, Karoline said, scribbling notes. Thanks for the risk you're taking. Just get this right, Lisa replied before hanging up. By dawn, Karoline had prepared dozens of potential questions and answers. She knew Chen wouldn't go easy on her. He would press hard on whether her original comments were appropriate, whether she respected the court, whether this was just political theater. As she showered and dressed, choosing a simple navy dress rather than her usual bold colors, her phone buzzed with a text from Ben. News just broke. 3 former Supreme Court justices released a joint statement questioning Roberts' authority to issue the fine. Momentum was building. But Karoline knew better than to get overconfident. Tonight's interview would be make or break. If she came across as disrespectful or partisan, she'd lose the moral high ground. If she seemed too rehearsed, viewers wouldn't trust her sincerity. The day passed in a blur of preparation. By late afternoon, she sat in a black town car heading to the network studios. Outside, a small crowd of supporters had gathered, holding signs reading "Free Speech Matters" and "Defend the Constitution." As the car pulled up to the studio entrance, Karoline took a deep breath. Her hands were steady now, her mind clear. Just before stepping out, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Remember who you are. We love you. With those words in her heart, Karoline stepped out of the car and into the glare of camera lights. Reporters shouted questions. She smiled politely but didn't answer, walking purposefully toward the studio entrance. Beyond those doors waited Chen and a television audience of millions. This wasn't just about saving her career anymore. Something much larger was at stake. As she straightened her shoulders and walked into the building, Karoline knew that in the next hour, she would either change the national conversation or become a footnote in constitutional history. The studio. Lights were hot. Karoline sat across from Chen, who was reviewing his notes one last time before they went live. The set of Straight Talk was smaller than it looked on TV. Just 2 chairs, a small table between them, and 4 cameras positioned around them. We're on in 60 seconds, called the floor director. Chen looked up at Karoline. Nervous? A little, she admitted. He nodded. Good. Keeps you sharp. Just so you know, I'm going to push you hard on this. No softballs. I wouldn't expect any, she replied. 10 seconds. Karoline straightened in her chair. She thought of her dad teaching history to high schoolers, explaining the importance of checks and balances. She thought of all the Americans who felt their voices weren't heard by those in power. Then the red light on the camera lit up, and they were live to millions of homes across America. Good evening, I'm Michael Chen. Tonight, an exclusive interview with White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, who finds herself at the center of an unprecedented constitutional standoff after Chief Justice John Roberts personally fined her $50,000 for comments she made criticizing a Supreme Court decision. Ms. Leavitt, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me, Michael. Chen wasted no time. Let's start with the comments that sparked this controversy. You said the court seemed more interested in political games than economic progress. Do you stand by that statement? Karoline took a deep breath. I stand by my right to make that statement, yes. The project that was blocked would have created thousands of jobs in areas with high unemployment. People are struggling. I believe the American people deserve to know what's at stake in these decisions. But shouldn't the White House show more respect for the Supreme Court's independence? Respect doesn't mean silence, Karoline countered. Every branch of government should be open to criticism. That's how democracy works. Let's look at the fine itself, Chen said, holding up a copy of the document. The Chief Justice cites a rarely used power to protect the court from, and I quote, attacks that undermine its constitutional function. Your response? Karoline leaned forward slightly. I'm not a lawyer, Michael, but I've consulted with many since receiving this fine. The consensus is that this is an extraordinary overreach. Justices can hold people in contempt for disrupting their courtroom, but punishing a government official for public comments? That's something new and, frankly, troubling. The interview continued for 30 minutes. Chen pressed hard on whether her original comments were appropriate, whether this was just political theater and how far she was willing to take this fight. Karoline kept her cool, focusing on the principles at stake rather than personalities or parties. As they neared the end, Chen asked the question everyone wanted answered. The fine is due in 30 days. Will you pay it? Karoline looked directly into the camera. No, I won't. Not because I can't afford it or because I disrespect the court, but because doing so would set a dangerous precedent. If I pay this fine, what happens the next time someone criticizes a powerful institution? What happens to free speech then? When the interview ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Chen extended his hand. Well done. You made your case. Karoline's phone started ringing the moment she left the studio. Her deputy, Ben, was first. You were amazing. Social media is exploding. Our Defend Free Speech is trending #1. Next was the Chief of Staff. The President watched. He's pleased. Calls are coming in from lawmakers on both sides who are concerned about the precedent this sets. By the time Karoline made it home, it was nearly midnight. She kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto her couch, finally allowing the adrenaline to subside. Her phone had over 100 unread messages, but one caught her eye, from Professor William Torres, her old constitutional law professor. Former student now teaching the country about the First Amendment. Couldn't be prouder. The next morning, the interview was everywhere. News shows played clips. Law professors wrote opinion pieces. Lawmakers issued statements, most expressing concern about the court's action, though a few defended Roberts. Karoline arrived at work early to prepare for her regular press briefing. The briefing room was packed beyond capacity with reporters standing along the walls. Before we start, Karoline said from the podium, I want to clarify something. This isn't about me versus Chief Justice Roberts. This is about fundamental, constitutional principles that affect all Americans. For nearly an hour, she fielded questions. Unlike most briefings where reporters tried to find contradictions or gotcha moments, today felt different. The questions were thoughtful, focused on the constitutional implications. As the briefing ended, a veteran reporter who had covered the White House for 30 years approached her. I've seen a lot of press secretaries come and go, he said quietly. Most try to avoid the spotlight. You've turned it into something meaningful. By afternoon, legal experts from across the political spectrum were weighing in. A group of law school deans released a joint statement expressing grave concerns about the constitutionality of Roberts' fine. The American Civil Liberties Union offered to file a brief supporting Karoline if the case went to court. Even some who disagreed with her original criticism of the court's decision were defending her right to make it. That evening, Karoline received A call from an unexpected source, a retired Supreme Court justice who had served alongside Roberts for years. "I don't typically involve myself in current controversies," the retired justice said, "but this action troubles me deeply. The court's moral authority comes not from its power to punish critics but from the wisdom and restraint of its decisions." "What do you think will happen?" Karoline asked. "The court doesn't like to admit mistakes," the justice replied. "But neither does it like being isolated. Right now, Roberts is finding himself increasingly alone on this." The next day brought another surprise. A group of historians published an open letter pointing out that criticism of the Supreme Court was as old as the Republic itself. They cited Thomas Jefferson's harsh criticism of Chief Justice John Marshall, Andrew Jackson's famous defiance of a court ruling, and more recent examples of presidents from both parties questioning court decisions. "Throughout our history," they wrote, "the dialogue, sometimes heated between branches of government, has strengthened our democracy, not weakened it." As the story entered its third day, what had begun as a seemingly straightforward attempt to silence a critic had transformed into a national conversation about free speech, separation of powers, and the role of criticism in a healthy democracy. Karoline was no longer just responding to a crisis. She was helping to shape a moment of constitutional importance. The fine that was meant to diminish her voice had instead amplified it beyond anything she could have imagined. As she prepared for another day of interviews and briefings, she reflected on how quickly life could change. 3 days ago, she was just doing her job. Now she was at the center of a case that might someday be taught in the same constitutional law class she once took. A week after the fine was issued, Karoline sat in her office, reviewing the latest polling data. Public opinion had shifted dramatically, in her favor, with over 70% of Americans saying they opposed the Chief Justice's action. What surprised her most was how the support crossed party lines. People who normally disagreed on everything seemed to agree on this. Ben knocked on her door. "Frame. Got a minute?" "Sure," she said, setting aside the polling report. "I just got a call from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. They want you to speak at an event about the First Amendment." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "The Constitution Center? That's not exactly a partisan place." "Exactly," Ben said, smiling. "That's why it's perfect. They're proposing a public forum on free speech and government criticism, not about politics but about principles." The idea appealed to Karoline immediately. From the beginning, she had tried to frame this as a constitutional issue rather than a political fight. This would be a chance to elevate the conversation even further. "Who else would be there?" she asked. "They're inviting legal scholars, journalists, historians, people from across the political spectrum. You'd be the keynote speaker." Karoline thought about it for a moment. The administration had been supportive, but she knew they were also watching the polls. If she could keep this about constitutional principles rather than partisan politics, she might actually achieve something lasting. "Tell them yes," she decided. "But I want to review all the materials. This can't look like we're just attacking the court." Planning for the forum took over much of the next week. Karoline worked closely with the Constitution Center to shape an event that would be educational rather than divisive. She insisted on a diverse panel of speakers and wanted students from local high schools and colleges to attend. The night before leaving for Philadelphia, Karoline called her dad. "How's my favorite history teacher?" she asked when he answered. "Proud," he replied. "My students are following your story. We're having the best discussions about the Constitution we've ever had." Karoline smiled. "Any advice for tomorrow?" "Just remember why this matters," he said. "It's not about winning an argument. It's about protecting something precious." The next morning, Karoline flew to Philadelphia with a small team. As their car approached the National Constitution Center, she was stunned to see hundreds of people lined up outside. Some held signs supporting free speech. Others wore T-shirts with the First Amendment printed on them. "Looks like we're not the only ones who care about this," Ben remarked. Inside, Karoline was shown to a small preparation room. The center's director greeted her warmly. "We've had to move to our largest hall," he explained, "and we're still overflowing. We're setting up screens outside for those who can't get in." As the time approached for her to speak, Karoline felt a familiar flutter of nerves. This wasn't like her daily press briefings. Today she wasn't just the president's spokesperson, she was speaking for herself, and for a principle she believed in deeply. The hall was packed when she walked onto the stage. People of all ages and backgrounds filled the seats. She spotted high school students, elderly couples, young professionals, and families. In the front row sat a group wearing judicial robes. Law students, she guessed, making a visual statement. Karoline took a deep breath and began. Thank you all for coming today. When I became press secretary, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, the same Constitution that protects our right to question our government and its institutions. She paused, looking out at the audience. That oath doesn't come with fine print. It doesn't say except when it's inconvenient or unless someone powerful might be offended. It simply asks us to defend the principles that make our country what it is. For the next 20 minutes, Karoline spoke about the importance of being able to criticize all branches of government. She quoted historical figures from across the political spectrum who had defended that right. She avoided mentioning Roberts by name, focusing instead on the broader principle. The strength of our system isn't that our institutions are beyond criticism, she said toward the end. It's that they're strong enough to withstand it. In fact, thoughtful criticism is what helps them improve and adapt over time. The applause when she finished was thunderous. People rose to their feet, some wiping away tears. Even some who had come skeptical seemed moved by her words. The panel discussion that followed brought together voices from different backgrounds. A conservative legal scholar and a liberal journalist found themselves nodding in agreement. A historian reminded everyone that the founders themselves had fierce disagreements about the role of courts in our democracy. During the audience questions, a high school student stood up. Ms. Leavitt, aren't you worried about your career? Standing up to someone as powerful as the Chief Justice could have consequences. Karoline thought about this. Of course I worry, she admitted. But some things are worth the risk. My parents taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. After the forum ended, Karoline stayed for nearly 2 hours talking with attendees. People shared stories of times they'd spoken up against powerful institutions, at work, in their communities, in government. A retired judge told her that while he often disagreed with her politics, he admired her stand on this issue. You've started something important here, he told her. Don't let it end with just your case. On the flight back to Washington, Ben showed Karoline the news coverage of the event. Every major network had covered it. Social media was flooded with clips and quotes. The hashtag, darn speak up stand up, was trending nationwide. This isn't just about, you're fine anymore, Ben observed. People are connecting it to their own lives, to times they've been afraid to speak up. Karoline nodded, looking out the airplane window at the darkening landscape below. That's what makes this worth fighting for, she said softly. When they landed, Karoline checked her phone and found a message from the White House counsel. Supreme Court clerk called. Justice is meeting tomorrow morning. Unusual timing. We'll update when I know more. She showed the message to Ben. What do you think it means? He asked. I don't know, Karoline replied. But something's happening. As they drove back into the city, past the monuments and buildings that represented American democracy, Karoline felt both exhausted and energized. Whatever happened next, she had helped start a conversation that was larger than herself, larger even than the specific conflict with the Chief Justice. She had turned what could have been a simple fine, an attempt to silence her, into a national reflection on the role of criticism in a healthy democracy. And regardless of how the court responded, that conversation wouldn't be easily silenced. Karoline awoke before her alarm the next morning. Sleep had been difficult, her mind racing with possibilities about what the Supreme Court might be discussing. She made coffee and sat by her apartment window, watching the city wake up. Washington looked peaceful in the early morning light, giving no hint of the constitutional drama unfolding within its buildings. Her phone rang at 7:15 a.m. It was the White House counsel. They're issuing a statement at 9 a.m., he said without preamble. My contact at the court wouldn't tell me what it says, but mentioned it's unprecedented. That word's getting a lot of use lately, Karoline replied, trying to stay calm. Any guesses? Could go either way. Roberts doesn't like to back down, but the pressure has been intense. 3 other justices have reportedly expressed concerns privately about his action. After hanging up, Karoline called Ben. We need to prepare for both scenarios, she told him. If they double down, we continue the fight. If they reverse course, we need to be gracious. The next 90 minutes were a blur of calls and preparations. By 8:45, Karoline was in her office at the White House, joined by the Chief of Staff, the White House counsel, and Ben. They gathered around a laptop, refreshing the Supreme Court's website repeatedly. At exactly 9 a.m., a new statement appeared. The room fell silent as they read, "Statement from the Supreme Court of the United States. After careful consideration of the unique constitutional questions raised, the court has determined that the contempt fine issued to White House press Secretary Karoline Leavitt exceeded traditional contempt authority. The fine has been rescinded effective immediately. The court maintains its commitment to judicial independence and the respect due to all branches of government, while recognizing the importance of open dialogue in a constitutional democracy." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ben broke the silence. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief and admiration. They backed down. The Chief of Staff was already on the phone to the President. The White House counsel was analyzing every word of the statement, looking for hidden meanings or traps. Karoline just sat there, taking it in. The statement was carefully worded, not quite an apology, but clearly a retreat. The court had found a way to save face while acknowledging they had overstepped. "Karoline," Ben was looking at her expectantly. "What do you want to say about this? The press room is already filling up. Everyone's expecting a statement." She thought for a moment. The temptation to declare victory was strong. Her political instincts told her to take a victory lap. But something deeper, the same instinct that had guided her through this fight, told her that would be a mistake. "Let's not gloat," she said finally. "This was never about winning or losing. It was about protecting something important." An hour later, Karoline stood at the podium in the White House briefing room. The room was packed beyond capacity, cameras flashing, reporters leaning forward in anticipation. This would be one of the most watched press briefings in years. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "As you've all seen, the Supreme Court has rescinded the contempt fine issued against me. I want to make a brief statement and then I'll take a few questions." She looked down at her notes, then set them aside. Better to speak from the heart. Today isn't about winners and losers. It's about reaffirming that in America we can question our institutions while still respecting them. That dynamic tension, the ability to criticize power while honoring the systems that distribute and check that power, is what keeps our democracy healthy. She paused, making eye contact with reporters around the room. "I want to thank everyone who spoke up about this issue. Legal experts, historians, journalists, ordinary citizens. This wasn't just about me or my fine. It was about a principle that belongs to all Americans." In the back of the room, she spotted her parents who had flown in that morning when they heard the news. Her father gave her a subtle thumbs up, his eyes shining with pride. "I also want to acknowledge the Supreme Court's decision today. In rescinding the fine, the court has demonstrated something important, that our institutions can reflect, reconsider, and respond to legitimate concerns. That's not weakness. That's the strength of our constitutional system at work." For the next 30 minutes, Karoline fielded questions. Unlike the usual combative tone of these briefings, today felt different. The questions were thoughtful, and Karoline's answers were measured. She refused to criticize Roberts personally or to frame this as a political victory. When asked if she would change how she spoke about court decisions in the future, Karoline smiled slightly. "I'll continue to be respectful but honest. That's my job. I believe we can disagree without being disrespectful, and we can respect institutions while still holding them accountable." After the briefing, Karoline hugged her parents tightly. "I'm so proud of you," her mother whispered, "not just for standing up, but for how you handled winning." Her father, the history teacher, looked emotional. "This is going in my lesson. Plans?" he said, only half joking. Later that day, Karoline received a surprising invitation. The dean of her old law school wanted her to give the commencement address in the spring. Similar invitations began pouring in from universities, civic organizations, and professional associations across the country. What had begun as a potential career-ending crisis had transformed her into something she never expected to be, isnt's voice for constitutional principles that transcended partisan politics. That evening, as the sunset painted the Washington Monument in golden light, Karoline walked along the National Mall with Ben, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past 3 weeks. "So what's next?" Ben asked. "Your profile has never been higher. People are already talking about your political future." Karoline shook her head. "I'm not thinking about that right now. What matters is that we've reminded people of something important, that the ability to question power is what keeps power in check." They stopped at the Lincoln Memorial, looking up at the words carved into the marble. "Government of the people, by the people, for the people." "You know what my dad always says about those words?" Karoline said softly. "Of the people means the government belongs to us. By the people means we choose who governs, but for the people means they have to answer to us. And that requires us to ask questions, even difficult ones." As they walked back toward the White House, Karoline's phone buzzed with yet another interview request. The story was still growing, evolving from a personal standoff with the Chief Justice into a national conversation about the role of criticism in democracy. The fine that was meant to silence her had done exactly the opposite. It had amplified her voice, and through her, the voices of countless Americans who believed in the right to question authority. What Chief Justice Roberts could never have anticipated was that in trying to intimidate one spokesperson, he had instead sparked a movement that would long outlast this particular conflict. Karoline smiled at the irony of it all. Sometimes the most powerful response to those who would silence you isn't shouting louder. It's turning their attempt at intimidation into an opportunity to speak about something larger than yourself. In that transformation, she had found not just her voice, but her purpose.